Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Stock Market Today for Monday, April 14th. We saw green on the screen, but with the major indexes fading, there's a pretty clear hurdle that we still need to clear. And joining me now to discuss is my colleague, Justin Nielsen. Justin, what do you have for us today?
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to go one step further and say there's a couple hurdles that we have to cross over.
Short term, baby
Yes,
steps, but yeah,
baby
a
steps,
lot of
exactly.
hurdles. You're right.
Yeah, but we'll take a look at a few stocks that are worth keeping on your radar. We'll start with Palantir and also take a look over in Argentina with MercadoLibre, and then also biotech, ADMA Biologics. This is one I actually have a position in.
Okay, we'll take a look at those stocks, but first, let's take a closer look at our major indexes. The NASDAQ today up 0.6% by the close. So once again, fading pretty badly here. We were on pace for a 1% plus gain earlier on. The S&P 500 up about 0.8% by the end of the day. Same for the Dow Jones, also up about 0.8%. The Russell 2000 did have a bit of a stronger gain here, up about 1.3% or so, headed into the final stretch of the day, but some pretty clear resistance here for the NASDAQ as it faded.
Yes. And you know what? Before we go too far, let's just kind of take a look at how the day unfolded, because we were talking about on IBD Live how we had this very strong gap up, and we never hit those highs that we opened at for the rest of the day. I actually set an alert because I was just curious. Okay, can we make it above there? Nope, not this time. And we came in, we were in negative territory, so it wasn't just this fade at the end that was kind of an issue. It was that we went negative for a while during the day. And after a 2% gain, to see it all vanish, it was a little bit, I was feeling a little bit better when it started coming back. I was adding a little bit of exposure, but then, yeah, not a great close. Don't have to worry about, was it a follow through day? Hey, don't have to worry about that this time around, because didn't qualify in terms of the price percentage move. And as you mentioned on the daily chart, the thing that also is a little concerning is we've got the Wednesday high, the 21-day moving average line, the previous low at 17,238.24, kind of putting this big brick wall that I'd really like to see the indexes punch through. And when you kind of have that brick wall, and there's the difference between the Kool-Aid man, if you remember that commercial, breaking through it and saying, oh yeah, and then I feel like when the indexes hit their heads against it and come back down, that's kind of an oh no. So it's a little concerning. It doesn't mean that the rally is dead. We certainly have all the way to last Monday's lows before we would consider this rally a failed rally. But if you were considering that Friday's action was a follow-through day in spirit, you really want to be kind of cognizant of where the low is on that day, because if we undercut that, that's really kind of suggesting a higher failure rate.
Right. I do think that getting above the 21-day line is going to be significant, and not only because that's a level that we really like looking at as active traders, but for the other areas that it lines up with. I think that just makes it a very important level to watch. Let's also see where those areas land on the S&P 500. Very similar. We have the high from last Wednesday, that previous March low, and a round number here around 5,500. So that's a pretty big hurdle to overcome before some other hurdles on the way up, if we can continue to make some progress here, Justin.
Yeah, the more you have those things kind of all lining up together, it does make it more meaningful when you break through it, but it also makes it more meaningful when you can't break through it. So certainly something that we have to watch very closely. And then if we do break through it, look, it's not like it's all clear. We want to get back above the 50-day moving average line. We want to get back above the 200-day moving average line. And, not to jump too far ahead into our ETF discussion, But another thing that bothered me a little bit is who was leading today? XLRE, the real estate, XLU, the utilities,
Mhm.
and XLP, the staples. And if you want to throw in gold there too, with GDX, that was another area. So all of these are very defensive in nature. And the fact that even when we were at our best, that's what was leading, still
Yeah.
making me feel a little iffy.
Exactly. And I think the other great reminder about the type of action that we saw today is sort of the tone and the approach to take, where caution is still warranted. This isn't a case where you get a 2% gap up at the open and you want to go in guns a blazing. We are in a very delicate position here underneath those major moving averages, even shorter term moving averages, and not to mention a ton of the volatility that we've been
Yes.
seeing. So this is not sort of the position where we want to just be hammering things hard. It's more of a cautious, hey, let's see if the gains can hold here. And
Mhm.
today they did not.
A very strong reminder that volatility a lot of times does take some time to kind of recover from when you have a lot of back and forth action, and it's not necessarily like this is all resolved, right? It doesn't mean that the market is going to continue being volatile, but there are still a number of news items that could easily toss us back and forth. What we've been kind of talking about that we'd like to see, especially after such a big wide spread that we saw on Wednesday, is a little bit of tighter action. And
Mhm.
so I wasn't too concerned that we were remaining inside that Wednesday big spread. But again, it's going to be very hard to get too excited until we can break above that. And that's really kind of what we're waiting for.
Absolutely. Okay, let's check in quickly on blue chips and small caps. Not a
Well, I
whole
mean,
lot else to say here for the Dow.
yeah, very similar to a lot of the things we were just talking about with the Nasdaq and the S&P 500, kind of having all of those things stacked right there. Now, this did get a little bit above Wednesday's high, but it just couldn't hold it, and so again, it's everything's getting kind of turned away at the same level, and so something to be concerned there. And the Russell 2000. There's still quite a bit of damage there. It's got more recovery work to do. It was already on the weak side, and
Mhm.
so, yeah, it's gonna take a little bit more to, I think, get people believing in this one again.
Right. I mean, if you were to just draw a downtrend from the highs, I mean, that would put us in, the 210 to 220 level for the ETF here, IWM, and we're at 186. So
Yeah. And for
lots
a
of
long time, we
progress.
were looking at that 200 level as such an important
Mhm.
area of support and resistance. And,
Right.
I mean, that goes back quite a ways. If you just kind of draw that line straight back, you can see how important that 200 level is. So, at a minimum, I
Yeah.
feel like we really kind of need to get back above there before this starts getting my attention again.
Totally agree. Okay, let's take a look now at the 10-year Treasury yield. We've been seeing the bond market all over the place, especially in the last week, and it looks like a little bit of relief here today with yields backing off.
Yeah, and so remember, here the idea is when you are defensive, when you are looking at investors going to safe havens, usually that is, treasury yields are going down because people are buying bonds, right? And that means that they're gravitating towards those safe havens, and when they gravitate towards that with buying, it pushes the bond prices up, yields down. There's an inverse relationship, and so it is, while it's nice to see that the return back to those safe havens, it's a mixed message, right? Because again, we saw that with the XLU and XLP and everything like that. So you kind of are seeing the safe haven thing come back here with the treasuries, but on a market, on market strength, you kind of want to see that go more into stocks and to the
Right.
growth. That tells you that you're a little bit more on that risk on approach, and that's just not where we're at right now. Especially when you see those yields coming down like they did, that means people are going back into the treasuries.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think at first, let's just see if we can get the volatility to calm down here a
Yeah,
little bit
right.
because that was quite a move that we saw. So not bad to see that that steady downtrend resume, but less volatility, I think, in the bond market would be welcome.
Yeah,
And
it's not a
go ahead.
place you want volatility.
Yeah. And to your point, Justin, what was up the most today and looking good? Those safe haven areas, XLU, the utilities up 1.8%, the staples up 1.7% on the day, real estate up 2.2% on the day, GDX, the gold miners, up about 0.6%, reversing higher after an early fade, but holding strong after a big week last week. And then on the other side of things, let's check out how the FANG stocks performed today. Talk about a fade.
Yeah.
FNGS here up just 0.2% on the day after a strong start.
Yeah, a very different look. Whereas again, defense was closing higher in their ranges with bigger gains, and your big FANG stocks, your big growth names, your Magnificent Seven, whatever you want to call them, a lot of fading on those, and they just didn't hold their strength, and that reversal just doesn't look great at those resistance levels.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about a couple of notable tickers from today's session, including Palantir, ticker PLTR, up 4.6% on the day, but it too was up much more at one point in the session before fading. And Palantir moving on news of a NATO contract. So there was a news element to this, but we know that this is a high profile, high octane name here, Justin. What do you make of today's close? I know you talk a lot about the true range of a stock's move, but put this in context for us here.
Yeah, so I mean, Palantir, as you mentioned, it was up almost 10% at the highs today, and so the fact that it closed, below 5%, that puts it, squarely within the lower half of the true range. So you get the true range by doing a comparison to the previous day's close, and if that's higher, than today's high, well, you use that instead of today's high. And if it's lower than today's low, well, you use that instead of today's low to kind of determine your range. So if you just looked at the closing range of what it did today from the high to the low, that was closing in the 20% range. So 46% for the true range is still pretty weak. And look, as you mentioned, one of the things about Palantir here is that it is a more volatile stock. And so when you already have the volatility going on in the indexes, in a big way, do you really want to go with the more volatile stocks? So that's something. Look, this is still on my radar, something that I'm watching. I like the setup, the double bottom setup. But when you look at the 21-day ATR percentage, that's at about 8.5%. That's how much it's moving on average each day. And so when something's moving that much, it's really hard to set a stop that's going to get you out without taking on a lot of damage. And so that was one of the reasons why, as much as Palantir looked interesting when it was up 10% and potentially challenging that 98.17, I was kind of like, well, no, thank you, because where am I going to set my stop? It couldn't have been today's low. It could have been like maybe yesterday's close. I mean, Friday's close. That was still just way too far away after the gap up today. So you really have to be sometimes very particular and pass up on things when the risk is just too high.
Yeah, it's an interesting market because we were in position at one point to potentially get some sort of follow through day, and you want to have stocks on your, quote unquote ready list where you could pull the trigger, but it's also the type of market where it's sort of a hold your horses market, right? Where we need to see how things shape up throughout the day, not jump in too quickly in that first, 5, 10, 15 minutes or even the first couple of hours like we would in a very strong market. So if conditions change, maybe we'll reassess how aggressive to be at this point. But I do think in terms of managing risk, now that it is right around that 50-day line, let's see, can it form some sort of handle here or tighten up before moving above that 98 or 100 level? So we'll have to see if this Washington stock can do that.
That's something that, look, you were hosting IBD Live today. You were throwing the caution flags up. I think pretty much everyone on on the
Yeah,
call
we all
today
do.
was doing the same thing. And so, yeah, it can be sometimes where folks are in the Q&A sometimes saying, why are you guys so cautious? This is a great day. And we're like, well, on Mondays, we've seen these gap ups before. It's not how you open, it's how you close.
Mhm.
And based on how we closed today, there was
Right.
a lot to be desired.
Mhm. And it was a pretty immediate fade too, right?
Yeah.
So it would have been one thing where, hey, later in the day we take out the highs and we're up and running. That
Yeah.
we'll change our minds,
Hmm.
and be flexible both directions, right? Getting more aggressive and making those incremental decisions as needed. So
Absolutely.
something to note there. Okay, next on our list, let's check out Mercado Libre. A lot of South American related stocks on the move today, Justin, and Mercado Libre here up 2% on the day.
Yeah, so this is something that Scott was talking about. GGAL, a bank there that he had bought on Friday, and yeah, what a big move. Of course, there was news here: 20 billion loan, International Monetary Fund. A lot of things going on with what they've done with their currency and capital controls that met certain requirements, and that's why that loan got extended. So yeah, that was helping GGAL, which is a foreign bank, and we have seen some strength in that foreign banks. We can kind of keep on coming up to some of those, IBN and a few others. But Mercado Libre, if you look at ARGT, which is the Argentina ETF, you can see that this was a nice move where it basically, got support shortly after undercutting that 200-day moving average line. We're already above the 50-day moving average line. So there's a lot of strength to be had there. And Mercado Libre is one of the largest, actually the largest component of ARGT. So when you're looking at areas of strength, Mercado Libre definitely came up. But look, this was a fade here as well. We're right there at the 50-day moving average line. There's still a ways to go to that 202, and we close at about 51% closing range on this one using the true range. If you use the actual range of the day, because the low was slightly higher
Mhm.
than the close of Friday, it ended up being a 49%. But right around the halfway mark. So this is something that's certainly worth paying attention to. Ed Carson, mentioned that, look, they do a lot of their business in Brazil.
Mm.
Brazil has a surplus. They're not necessarily going to be on that naughty list.
For the
So
tariffs.
that's something that could potentially be good for Mercado Libre. And you also have that, a lot of things that we've been talking about with Argentina in terms of a little bit more of embracing of some capitalism and some strong measures there on the financial side that have really been helping them tamp down some huge inflation levels that they had. So this is something that is worth watching, this whole area, as we see from ARGT and Mercado Libre. This has been a winner in the past, so it's going to be remains to be seen if this one can become a winner in the future as well.
Right. And it looks like to kick off the week, Mercado Libre on the weekly chart does have a relative strength line at new highs, even though it's 7% below that left side. Well, actually, the middle peak, it's about 14% below its highs from a couple of months ago. Justin, really quickly before we move on, the personality of this stock makes it tricky to buy strength.
Yeah, and that's important that you kind of recognize. Is this a company or a stock that is that gets up to certain levels, breaks out, and then kind of turns around, or is it something that's better to buy on pullbacks? And right now, this has seen better to buy on pullbacks because a lot of these breakouts haven't really gone very far, but. As you mentioned, the relative strength is definitely a big thing. The fact that this is already at highs with the stock 14% off of its all-time high, that's pretty incredible. And so it does show you that, hey, look, this doesn't necessarily mean it's been going up. It just means it's been going down less than the indexes. But that's still something to note, especially with something that still has a good story. You see that huge growth rate that it has. And even though the earning stability is kind of high at 27, it's not ridiculously high. You see that earnings line has a nice upward trajectory. So there's They're pretty good earnings that have been going on for a while here, and really strong at that, because 163%, that's the annual growth rate. So imagine if you were growing your salary by 163% each year. That's pretty notable and pretty impressive.
Very impressive. Okay, let's round things out with a look at ADMA in the biotech space. One of the few breakouts in today's session and a pretty decent close here, Justin. Shares up about 7.8% on the day, and the closing range here at 74%, not including that true range. So even higher if you consider the gap above Friday's close, but a strong performance here today with some volume behind it.
Yeah, so I mean, it has all of the elements that we look for. This actually did get support at its 200-day moving average line, so it's already kind of set apart from the indexes. The fact that it was able to hold that line, it did spend some time below its 50-day, but the handle that got created by this cup with handle was pretty much all above the 50-day moving average line. That's another element of strength. And finally, one of the things that we were talking about on IBD Live today was the fact that this had its low at 1350, came up, and whereas the indexes were making new lows recently, this has held up. So rather than all of these double bottoms that we've been seeing, this is one that held up very nicely. And when you kind of get that that divergence, it's
Mhm.
really worth noting. And on IBD Live this morning, we were talking about 2009 as an example. I would also point people to Charles Schwab back in 1998, when long-term capital management, a lot of volatility in September and October of 1998. And when the market, the NASDAQ, came in very heavy with an undercut, Charles Schwab, it was a deep handle, but it still stayed above its lows. And that was pretty remarkable there. So ADMA has that going for it. As I mentioned, I did buy some today. This is something, again, we were talking about on IBD Live. I kind of fleshed out the idea a little bit more. Watched a video by Allison
Mhm.
Gatlin, who does a lot of our biotech coverage, and yeah, it's got a breakout. Now, I'm not going really super heavy on a lot of these positions. I'm kind of dipping my toe in the water to see how things play out. I can always add to it later, and or I can have a number of little positions that will get me exposure, and then I'll just start seeing what's holding up best. But
Right.
yeah, I'm keeping my loss pretty tight here. Not going to let this go below today's low.
Great. And you watched the video or you read an article?
You know, I read the article, but you know what? She did a video on something too. So there was a video she was on there. So
Great.
it wasn't about that though.
But it was both. But you did. You're staying in tune with her beat. I like
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yes. So it was ADMA was our stock of the day a couple weeks ago. So that's one place to read more about this company, and a great analysis there on that relative strength. All right. Well, that is it from us today, everyone. Thank you so much, Justin.
Thank you.
And thanks for tuning in. We will be back with more tomorrow morning on IBD Live, investors.com/IBD Live for all the details. We'll see you there in the morning, starting 10 minutes before the opening bell. And then we'll see you right back here tomorrow after the close.